Never trust a stranger. Never stop upon your way. Beauty may blind, but not all smiles are kind. Beware if you stray too far, and you might just find yourself in the company of wolves. After a young girl falls asleep in her house in the countryside, she dreams of a life in a fairy tale forest with her family in the old days. But when her sister is killed by wolves in the dream, she goes to stay with her grandmother, who tells her tales of monsters that walk like men.
Animals. All wild animals.
The story can be a little confusing, as besides the main plot, there are also a few short stories in there. And unlike movies that end with "it was all a dream," this one starts in a dream. It's a surreal fairy tale with sexual undertones based on Angela Carter's short story, with some really cool transformation scenes and a solid ending.
Now, as then, 'tis simple truth. Sweetest tongue has sharpest tooth.
Born of the storm with thunder as your lullaby and the wild forest as your cradle, for the wilderness sings to your soul, yet loneliness is not a tree in the field, nor a child in the forest. Loneliness is the cold stone walls of a robber's fortress. Ronia is the daughter of the chief of a good-natured band of robbers living in a castle, but things get tricky when she befriends a boy who is the son of her dad's rival, after the group moves into the other side of their castle. It's a feel-good coming-of-age fantasy movie based on Astrid Lindgren's book. The characters are easy to like and the story is beautifully uplifting. Not to mention there's a bit of nudity, and like any good 80s children's fantasy movie, it's not short on frightening scenes. And for some reason, they really don't like these little goblins.
It's not happening.
Father, it is!
Get on board! No thanks.
Who do you think you are?
Panic buggers.
Sinking, Brazil is sinking!
Well, my dear, I think you'll find it's all a question of what you want to believe in, and I happen to have more experience in these matters than you do, I think.
Long before the sagas were carved in stone, the old ways demanded blood and glory. Yet in the heart of one soul, a different song rises. A yearning for peace, as if the gods can be defied, and if a man can find his way beyond the edge of the world. Erik isn't like the other Vikings. He's not really into all the killing and pillaging, but when he learns the world is stuck in the age of Ragnarok, he and his crew head to Asgard, hoping to persuade the gods to hit the brakes on the whole age of Ragnarok thing. From Monty Python's Terry Jones, a story about a pacifist Viking seems funny on its own, and the humor might not reach the same level as the Monty Python, but there are still some good laughs, thanks mostly to a great cast that keeps things entertaining.
Just cut his hand off.
Thank you, my lord. Thank you, a million thank yous.
We've got Tim Robbins, John Cleese, Mickey Rooney, Terry Jones himself, and even a cameo from Eartha Kitt. Truth may be buried, but it is never truly lost. The dead may speak, but only to those who listen. For some stories, time is no healer, as the past never forgets, and neither does the Lady in White. A young boy named Frankie has a rough day after being pranked by two small humans and getting stuck in the locker room. Things go from bad to worse when he witnesses the ghost of a young girl who was murdered there, and just his luck, the real killer happens to show up that same night. From then on, Frankie keeps seeing the ghost of the girl, but that's not his only problem. He's also being haunted by the mysterious Lady in White. It's not exactly a horror movie. There are no cheap jump scares. It's a ghost story with a murder mystery thrown in. and it's a bit predictable, but that doesn't mean it's not entertaining because the film keeps the suspense going pretty well. The cinematography is stylish, and Lukas Haas is perfect for this role, reminds you of the kid in The Sixth Sense. It's a ghost story done just right, and a fun watch overall.
I want him kneeling at my feet.
After all this time, Grayskull is ours.
Ow!
At the edge of darkness and light stands Castle Grayskull, but the army of darkness does not rest, for the sword of power has been drawn, and with it begins the battle for the fate of Eternia, and those who control it will hold the power to become masters of the universe.
I dare anything! I am Skeletor!
On the planet Eternia, the evil Lord Skeletor seizes control of Castle Grayskull, the center of power in the universe, with the help of the Cosmic Key, a device that opens portals anywhere in the galaxy. But when He-Man and his friends discover another key to stop him, during the battle, they open a portal to Earth and lose the key in the process. And now both He-Man and Skeletor's armies are searching for it, only for it to be found by two teenagers. It's a campy movie, but there are two things that make it a fun watch. First, Dolph Lundgren is as badass as ever. And second, and easily the best part, is Frank Langella as Skeletor, who's so good at being evil you might just end up rooting for him over the hero.
I, Skeletor, am master of the universe.
Some evils refuse to die, some vengeance cannot be escaped. As a servant of darkness slips through the cracks of time, the hunter follows, one chasing redemption, the other seeking the end of all things. In the 17th century, when witch hunting was all the rage, an evil warlock was captured and sentenced to death, but he escaped into the future with supernatural help, forcing the witch hunter to follow him as the warlock searches for the devil's book to undo all of creation, with the witch hunter and a young woman trying to stop him.
That guy was a warlock?
The rudest that ever troubled daylight.
Yeah, it's cheesy, but the good kind. The story is basically like Highlander or even Terminator, and there's just something about villains in old movies being so deliciously evil and irredeemable, and Julian Sands absolutely kills it as the warlock.
I need no broomstick to fly.
Yeah? What do you need?
And on top of that, Richard E. Grant is also great as the witch hunter, with good chemistry between him and Laurie Singer, and thankfully they didn't focus too much on a romance between them. It was written by David Toohey, known for his Riddick series, and there are some cool witch tropes in the story, like how they set up the witch hunter with no magical powers to fight against a powerful warlock. It's a very entertaining and fun movie that definitely falls into the better than it looks category.
Tell me, must we travel on just one side of the roadway, or is it whichever we choose?
Yeah, it's just one side.
Which side might that be?
The right side.
Through the endless night, a dark promise calls, come closer, and you will see things you never imagined, a taste of desire and the weight of a soul's bargain as something wicked this way comes. In a small town, life is pretty normal until a mysterious carnival arrives, seemingly able to grant anyone's deepest desires. But Jim and Will, two young friends, soon realize there's something much darker going on. Disney made some pretty cool dark fantasy films back in the day when they weren't afraid to explore their darker side, like Dragon Slayer and Return to Oz, and this one, based on Ray Bradbury's novel, shares that same quality. Director Jack Clayton did a great job creating a stylish, atmospheric film, And even though it has some horror scenes, the real horror comes from the building tension and the story itself, with Jason Robards being excellent and Jonathan Pryce as Mr. Dark just as good, particularly in the library scene where they both really bring it.
Now, 39, a fine year. Still young, 39. Oh, 40, and here you're old.
Disney doesn't really make these kinds of dark fantasy movies anymore, which is a shame. They really knew how to nail that mix of creepy and magical back in the day.
Dad! Dad, come in, it's getting dark.
Anna? Is that you?
Yes?
I'm blind!
With each stroke of the pencil, a house rises from the paper, a sanctuary of fleeting lines. But as the mind shapes its creation, the house becomes a prison that even the walls seem to know your name in Paperhouse. After a young girl sketches a house on paper, she passes out and finds herself in a dream, standing before the very house she drew. As she begins exploring the house, she meets a boy who lives there, and together they try to solve its mystery. It's a minimalist fantasy movie with no flashy CGI or magical creatures, just good old-fashioned storytelling based on Marianne Dreams by Catherine Storr, with stylish directing from Bernard Rose, the director of Candyman. The story is kind of like a subtle version of Silent Hill. It's more of a psychological thriller than a full-on horror movie set in a fantasy world, but it still has some creepy scenes, nothing over the top, but it catches you off guard with how the story is set up.
I'm coming.
As death walks under a sky heavy with plague and prayer, a boy's vision lights the way, leading the lost through the dark threads of time on an Odyssey in search of salvation. In 14th century England, after hearing news of the Black Death ravaging the world, a remote village places its hope in a boy's visions. He tells them they must dig through the earth to the other side of the world to save themselves, only to find themselves in 20th century New Zealand. The film is strong on both style and substance, and like Vincent Ward's other film, What Dreams May Come, it's beautifully shot. It breaks away from the typical adventure fantasy films, and that's what makes it so refreshing. And like all good movies after the end, it gives you something to think about. A boy with a mind too sharp for his years, a mystery so strange that only the impossible will make sense, for when the impossible calls, the game is always afoot. Our bright young Sherlock Holmes, loved by all his teachers and hated by the students, meets John Watson for the first time at boarding school. At the same time, a series of strange deaths starts happening around town, and Holmes is the only one who thinks they're connected. So he and Watson decide to investigate.
The game is afoot.
It's an original and fun take on Sherlock Holmes in his teenage years, and what's interesting is how the film shows why he became a detective and how he picked up the character trademarks we know from Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock. As for Watson, well, in this film, he just talks to his food.
Yes, Mr. French Pastry.
The film has great production value, with big names like Barry Levinson, Chris Columbus, and Steven Spielberg behind it, which probably explains all the Indiana Jones-style action. And it was also the first movie to have a fully CGI character, created by Industrial Light and Magic. Before a lifetime of adventure, they lived the adventure of a lifetime, a friendship that would make even the greatest mysteries seem elementary.
Why on earth did you buy a pipe?
It looks distinguished.
It looks perfectly ridiculous.
Thank you for watching, and for more underrated movies, be sure to subscribe to Underrated Cinema.